I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about the award itself. It was originally created in North Lanarkshire Council by a broad range of staff to support children and young people who are care experienced. It was to support them on their journey through early years, school, and beyond in education. Everyone involved in creating the original award and this refreshed award wanted to create a vehicle to raise awareness of care experienced children and young people and some of the challenges that they face. It was designed to develop our understanding around the national commitment made by the Scottish Government and supported by each of your local authorities to improve the learning experience and educational outcomes of our care experienced children and young people. The professional learning in the award helps us to identify our responsibilities to these learners. The award itself is a way to recognise educational settings who are really trying to understand and meet the needs of these learners and in their delivery of support to them. It's really simple and straightforward. It consists of 2 short training sessions, the next one being next Tuesday, and it's delivered in conjunction with a very short e-learning course. When completed by a threshold of staff in an educational establishment, so you're doing this as individuals now, but you can also do this at a later stage as a whole staff group. And when a whole staff group, when 70% of that staff group do this particular training, the school can then get a separate award. This first session covers the national context, the terminology around care experience and good parenting, it's often referred to as corporate parenting, the promise itself, and what all that means for our practice. Throughout the session, where possible, the voice and lived experience of care experienced children and young people have been used through film. Hopefully, this session will demonstrate the positive impact both education itself and we practitioners can have on care experienced children and young people's lives and learning. So this professional learning is for all staff who have contact with children and young people. So that's teachers, support staff, the janitors, cleaning ladies, office staff, catering staff in schools, because they all interact with our learners. So we want schools to offer opportunities for all of those staff to do this training over time. So that could be part of in-service training, induction training for new staff, and it could be regularly refreshed. To obtain a full award for a school, as I said before, you need a threshold of 70% of your staff to have done this training. So we're hoping some of you will go away, use the resources and deliver it as in-service training within your establishments. So let's get started on what the award is really about. So you'll recognise this. GARFEC underpins, so getting it right for every child underpins how we work with children and young people across all services in Scotland. It provides us with a consistent framework and shared language for promoting, supporting and safeguarding the well-being of all learners, including those who are care experienced. GARFEC promotes a common understanding of well-being, recognising that children and young people need to grow up safe, healthy, achieving, nurtured, active, respected, responsible and included, so that they can become confident individuals, effective contributors, successful learners and responsible citizens. GARFEC contributes to work on family support and delivering the promise made to all Scotland's children, young people and their families. A shared commitment to reorganise how we think, plan and prioritise for children, young people and their families. GARFEC is a strength-based approach which seeks to realise children's rights on a day-to-day basis. GARFEC places the child or the young person and their family at the heart of everything that we do. And GARFEC is about enhancing that well-being of all children and young people, as well as building a flexible scaffold of support. So where it's needed, for as long as it's needed. So we should really start by making sure we all share the same understanding of who we're talking about, our care experienced children and young people. So some children and young people need to be looked after by their local authority when they don't receive adequate care from their parents, or there are other concerns about their well-being. You'll be familiar with the term looked after, sometimes shortened to LAC. terminology and expressions such as children who are in care, children who are accommodated, and more recently, children with care experience who are experiencing care. Well, what's the difference between these terms, and does it really matter? Well, yes, it matters. It matters both legally and in terms of how we reduce the stigma around care. Looked after is the legal term used by Scottish Government and refers to a child or young person whose care is supervised formally or on a compulsory supervision order by the local authority through social work services. They can be looked after at home or away from their parental home in a range of settings or arrangements. We'll go into those different types of care in more detail later. If a child or a young person no longer needs to be formally looked after, this will be decided at a children's hearing and they become previously looked after. So these are the codes that are used in our CMIS recording system. Currently, only children and young people who are legally looked after or previously looked after should be recorded on CMIS. However, children and young people find the expression looked after stigmatizing and uncaring. They prefer the expression care experienced. We therefore use care experienced as an umbrella term for all of the types of care highlighted above. Using the expression care experienced shifts the emphasis from making the person the subject rather than the object, with care being seen as something that they've come through and learned from rather than simply something that defines them. So additionally, not all children and young people who are care experienced or who experience care with people other than their parents or in places other than their parental home are formally looked after and come under compulsory supervision by social work. We need to know and support these children too. So those who are in informal arrangements, say for example living with a granny, but aren't under the supervision of social work. We need to know who they are, we need to support them, but they should not be recorded on CMIS in terms of their status. And we'll come back to this later in a bit more detail. But first we want to look at what it's like for a young person experiencing care, some of the challenges that they face, and why the system supporting these young people need to change. So we said we would bring this to you from the voice of care experienced young people.
Could not stigmatise young people in care. I just wish people would know that it's not our fault. The vast majority of people who come into care come in because their parents can't care for them. I started my care journey when I was 6 months old, when I was taken from my mother for various reasons. No matter how short a time you spend in care or how long a time you spend in care, the effects are lifetime long. We're going to go to Girdle where I grew up and spent 17 years of my life in care. When I came to Girdle, I was 5 years old, and that was me moving on from an abusive foster placement. I came to a family who embraced me. I was very connected to the wider network in the family, which is what a real family would do. It became harder when I was in secondary education. That's when the majority of the relationship problems began. I came into secondary education following on from the death of my mum. I wasn't equipped with the skills to mourn or how to process death. My first day I got off the school bus, I got in an argument with a boy, ended up in a fist fight, and from that point Billy Brotherson, who was the year head at that time, took me into his class straight away and basically said that this is not going to continue for the rest of the year.
It was a bit of a handful. I think at that time that was maybe some of the issues that Jamie was struggling with coming out in his behaviour. But I think the thing for me was, and I've always said this to him, was I always saw the real guy behind the behaviour.
Billy made it a personal commitment to build a connection with my foster carers at home, which spanned the whole time I was in education.
And you made it.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant.
I realised when I was 16 years old that if I continued down the path I was going, I would have found myself with a criminal record, and I wouldn't have made anything with my life. So I had to really look inside myself and say, I need to do better. But I had good support to get to that point. So if more young people had support, I think we'd see more young people in care at university. If it wasn't for that placement, I wouldn't be at university. I wouldn't have made it to the place where I am. But they're not in my life anymore. If you don't find that nurturing, loving environment quickly, it's going to have a lot of detrimental effect when you're an adult. In my case, you know, as much as I did have a loving placement for many years of my life, I didn't get it quick enough. Now we're going to take a nice lovely drive back to Glasgow, where I'm studying the BA in Community Development. First time I came to university I was 20. I was enthusiastic about life, enthusiastic about studying, but through personal circumstance that kind of faded. So I came away from it and was very nearly almost homeless. If it wasn't for my partner and her mum. Failure's important. Failure is also putting us out our comfort zone, and I know that when I'm out my comfort zone I'll learn most. My main ambition is to put love into the care system in a way that underpins how practitioners and professionals deliver care. When you're born into this world, one of the main ingredients you need is love. Love pretty much underpins how we care for people. So why shouldn't it be recognised as a word that we use when we talk about young people in care and adults in care? I hope to leave a mark in the world that makes a difference.
We have had provision in place for care leavers or anyone with care experience for over 10 years now. This is something that we do believe in very strongly. Entry to the university and success at the university should be based on talent and ability rather than circumstance.
I value Dan's role at the university, but I value Dan as a person as well. You know, just a really good guy who cares. You know, when I told him I was returning to university, he just spent a lot of personal time understanding where I'm at, and it just total reassurance that he's going to be there through this journey. There's no wrong path to higher education, and there's no wrong time to come either.
What do you think your mum would be thinking if she was seeing you here?
Probably cried. So all she wanted was the best for me in life, and I think that was one of the reasons why she was so happy for me to go into care. Because she knew that I would probably get to a place like this. Proud that I've plucked up the courage to come back, and this is my second attempt, and it will be my final attempt because I'm going to do it.
Okay, that powerful film of just one young man's life experiences and his caring educational journey gives us a flavour of the challenges faced by care experienced children and young people. Jamie's story has ended with him accessing higher education, but unfortunately this isn't the case for many other children and young people who have experienced care. For many, their journey through education and care system isn't always as positive. So who are our care experienced young people and how are they cared for? Just going to have a look at the table here. The latest social work statistics show that we have approximately 12,500 legally looked after children and young people in Scotland. Of these children and young people, the majority of them live with a family member other than their parents or in a fostering arrangement. Around 20% are supported by social work to stay at home with their parents, and the rest will be in residential settings such as residential children's houses or schools with prospective adopters or in their community setting. A very small number of young people are cared for in secure settings. This provides a snapshot view of the current care experience children and young people at one moment in time. However, the picture is constantly changing as more children come into the care system and others come off of supervision orders or are adopted. To add to the complexity of the situation, these figures only represent groups of young children and people who are officially and legally looked after, the ones we officially record on STEMIS. However, we know that there is a much larger group of children and young people who are informally cared for by grannies, granddads, aunties, uncles, brothers or sisters, or family friends who are not formally recorded. These are often referred to as informal kinship arrangements, and these children and young people may face challenges similar to those who are legally looked after and are also likely to need our consideration and care. These children and young people are often recognised in our recording systems as those who require additional support socially and emotionally and with their behaviour. The expression care experienced, however, does not include children and young people who are temporarily staying with relatives on a babysitting arrangement. The next slide for the training is optional, so you can put your local authority data into the table and discuss it when you're delivering the training. You can insert this data and describe the cohort, and it may be good to discuss with your staff the implications of the data within your local authority or cluster. Similarly, slide 12, you can input your school data and you can break it down and describe it and include information regarding informal arrangements which will be known at school level. Okay, so what can education and what can we do for someone who is care experienced? This might give you the opportunity when delivering the training to ask your staff to consider the following questions. So who are your young people? How do we influence their lives? And what can education mean to them? What we're going to do now is hear from another young person with care experience who now works herself as an Education Promise project officer in North Lanarkshire Council.
We're moving on. Beth Ann. In North Lanarkshire, you specifically focus on supporting schools in keeping the promise for care experienced children and young people. One of those promises is to prioritise stable, loving relationships, particularly for children and young people who've experienced care. So what does this title particularly mean to you and your experience in education?
Thank you, Janine. I suppose I'm going to start with a quote that my good friend John Carnochan says quite a lot. No matter the question, the answer is relationships, essentially. So I suppose the work that you were referring to in the introduction speaks about how we can get our education colleagues and staff understanding what the promise means for them, how to put it into practice. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail at the end, but I suppose I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey as to why it's so important to me personally. So as a young person growing up in the care system, education was supposed to be my outlet, my relief. I was bright, I was clever, I really enjoyed going to school, but sometimes school didn't enjoy me being there. So from a very early age, I remember in primary 1 walking up to the dinner hall with no shoes on because my teacher had taken my shoes off because I kept playing with the Velcro, but I was searching for a sensory need. And the head teacher took me and said, "Where is your shoes?" And I said, "They're in the classroom." She threw them behind the piano and she took me back and she said, "Get her shoes." And then again, the same head teacher, when I went into primary 2, I was dealing with life at home as it was, the change in transitions, the change in placements and things like that as well. and this teacher expected everybody to have a pencil, a rubber, a ruler and a pen. And I'll never forget what that same head teacher said at primary 2 is what she did at primary 1. It matters not that she doesn't have a pencil, rubber, ruler or a pen. She's here and she's willing to learn. And that was my motto going forward in my experience education for all those years, was I'm here and I'm willing to learn, like feed me some knowledge please. And then again, as things in my home life drifted and changed and moved on and things like that, that head teacher stayed with me. She would come and she would pick me up and she would physically take me to school on the days that I felt like I couldn't make it, and she would sit with me and she would say, we can do this, we can do it together. I moved into a new residential home miles away from my family and my friends and my school, and she would come up every Sunday and she would take me to her family. She would welcome me in. Her mum was my gran. Like, we would go family dinners, we would do Christmases together, we'd do birthdays together. She didn't have to do that, but she did it for the love of me, and that's why I was really inspired about hearing about love and relationships tonight. Is she loves me. She's now grandma to 13 grandchildren, and she always calls me the 14th grandchild. And as I was growing up, and as wherever I went in my journey, whether that was secure care, whether that was down in England, she was always there at the end of the phone and a visit or anything like that. And she would always say, education is the key. You can do this. We can do this. Then kind of moving on, one of my experiences within secure care, I entered secure care when I was 13 and I was there for over 18 months. I left when I was 22 months, sorry, I left when I was 16. And I was in 4th year, so I went from 3rd to 4th year in that transition period within the secure unit. And my exams were coming up, and I really wanted to sit them, and I was the last group of young people to sit standard grades. That shows you how old I am now. But I remember studying it really, really hard. The education team with the Secure Care Centre brought in tutors for subjects that they didn't do. They didn't do foreign languages because it wasn't deemed that young people like us should have the ability to access foreign languages. But actually pushing back on them and the team around the child that I had around me said, well, actually, why not? And it's about pushing those boundaries. Why not? Asking the question, why not? And then my exams were coming up. I was really excited, and I got out of secure care, and I had no school to go to. So I was placed in a social work office with past papers and just sat there for 7-8 hours a day. I got 1 hour tutor for my French once a week, and that was it. That was my education. They didn't have an examiner, an invigilator. They didn't have a place for me to sit my exams. They didn't know what was going to happen. It was approaching kind of 2 weeks to my exams, and I was getting really antsy, and I was getting frustrated because I really wanted to sit my exams. And I ended up having to put myself back into secure care. I had to exhibit the behaviours that had got me to the point of secure care those 18 months before, and I had to do it all over again because the system wasn't designed to enable people like me who have experiences like I have to be able to sit their exams. So I entered secure care 5 days before my exams, and the education manager, sorted out an invigilator, a place to sit my exams, and a timetable. And I sat my exams. I got a 1 for English, I got a 1 for French, and I got a 2 for maths. Now, that doesn't seem like much. It doesn't seem that like 3 exams, and I always kind of feel a bit guilty about that as well. Sometimes I punish myself a bit on that, thinking you could have done more, but actually, and the whole ethos of what I was experiencing at that time, that was more than enough. And actually, it took me a long time to realise, actually, I'm proud of me. And I will continue to be proud of me. I'm still on a learning journey. I've spoken on public platforms before about I'm starting my SVQ4 in children and young people. I've got a good job doing what I love to keep the promise. And I suppose when our virtual school head teacher came to me and said we need to do something in our schools, and I said absolutely yes we do, and we developed this award. So basically what it means is our education staff, and that's everybody in the school setting, your janitors, your dinner ladies, the clerical assistants, it's everybody that comes together. They get educated on what the promise is. We have input from psychological services. We have input from care experienced people as well, and we speak about why it's so important. We talk about relational approaches, we talk about restorative practice, and at the end of it there's an e-learning module where there's over 4 sessions, so there's 4 kind of 1 hour sessions, and then there's the e-learning module, and at the end of the module, if 70% of the school staff have completed it, they get this Keeping the Promise award. We're not sure what that looks like yet, we're not sure, we've not got a badge, we've not got a flag, we don't know, but I suppose our starting point was we have to do something that's going to make a difference and have an impact. And I think that in the whole kind of experience that I've had and what drives me to the table, so my experience isn't all I bring to the table, but it's what drives me to the table, and it's what drives me to platforms like this. And I think the most important thing that I remember throughout my journey is the fact that I had one person cheering me on. I had one person as my cheerleader from the sidelines, in amongst it, whether it was the good, the bad, the ugly. And I had somebody that was determined that I would be claimed, that I would grow up loved, that I would grow up cherished. And that's the most important thing that we can do for our children and young people.
So let's move on to our legal duties towards children and young people who are care experienced. Let's start from our current understanding of this expression, corporate parent. This could be an additional activity as part of the training. This could be carried out as a discussion, or you could create a Menti, Jamboard, or similar to capture responses. Word clouds are also great for this. So officially, corporate parents are the formal and local partnerships between all services responsible for working together to meet the needs of looked after children, young people, and care leavers. And they have statutory duties to collaborate with each other in upholding the rights and securing the well-being of looked after children. This is from the Children and Young People Scotland Act of 2014. Unofficially, a corporate parent is intended to carry out many of the roles a loving parent should. In the 2014 Children and Young People's Act, there are 26 corporate parent public bodies listed. These corporate parents have legal duties under the Act. Many of these corporate parents are large umbrella entities such as local authorities. This means, however, that every single employee within each of the 32 local authorities is a corporate parent, and as such has legal duties towards care experienced people. Another example is Education Scotland. As an executive agency of the government, it acts on the instruction of Scottish ministers and is also a corporate parent. All these corporate parents collectively have a legal duty to coordinate their efforts to support care experienced people. This is a quote from the Promise Report of 2020. In it, they say that they have deliberately avoided using the term corporate parent. It reads, "Nevertheless, Scotland must live up to its responsibilities in relation to the children it has and has had responsibility for and be a good parent." It is tempting to define what a good parent is. However, like love, to do so would only apply an institutional version of parenting and create the danger of further systemisation of care. Care experienced children and young people, through the review, also told us that they found the care system cold, overly professionalised and uncaring. We now have a short video created by the Edinburgh Champions and Edinburgh City Council, asking the question, what kind of corporate parent are you?
Corporate parenting is the responsibility of certain bodies and organisations to do a good job of looking after children in care or those who have experienced the care system. It's akin to being a good aunt or a good uncle, that kind of way of just looking out for people and making sure that we do what we can to make sure they have the best possible experience.
I was 5 when I got taken off my mum and dad because they wasn't unable to look after me, and I also got split up with my sister, which was very upsetting and distraught.
There's lots of different reasons and it's quite nuanced at times, but the reality is that children come into care because they're at risk of coming to greater harm if they don't.
It's the local authority's responsibility to make sure that these children and young people are looked after, they're safe and they're protected. However, it's not just down to the social work department. It's down to you as a corporate parent to make sure that they're meeting all of their needs.
A piece of legislation came into effect in 2015 called the Children and Young People Scotland Act.
There's 24 corporate parenting bodies that also by law have a duty and responsibility to help look after our care community.
And that means that every single employee in one of those organisations is a corporate parent.
This can be hard to get your head around, to understand what you can do to help if you're not in one of the big teams that deals directly with care experienced young people.
But actually, there's lots that you can do to help and support care experienced young people.
So a good corporate parent to me is Edinburgh Leisure. They've helped support me throughout the past few years by providing me with free access to their gyms and swimming pools. This has motivated me to keep active and stay with my hobbies.
Mine would be the widening and participation officer when I first joined university. She recognised that I had some family issues and I have to support someone that's really close to me, and having her always by my side for the first few months, checking on me and how I'm doing with my studies, gave me a feeling that I'm welcome at university.
Another good corporate parent for me is the NHS. They've really helped me with my mental health, especially after losing my best friend and feeling very suicidal. They consistently call and check up on me to make sure that I'm okay, and just knowing that they're there and at the other end of the phone.
I think it's probably quite easy to get into that headspace of thinking this has got nothing to do with me. But as you can see from what our young people have said, it can actually just be the small things day in, day out that can make the biggest of differences. And there's lots of different ways that you could potentially make a big difference in somebody's life.
A small thing that someone done for me was when I first went into kinship care, when the police arrived to take us, they took us into M&S and got us Percy Pigs, and it made it really normalised for my younger siblings.
When my mum passed away, my head teacher attended the funeral to give us support.
I think corporate parenting is helping me fill out forms. When I had my own house, I was just 17. They acknowledged that I didn't have family or friends around to support me financially or to help me with forms that were just so complicated and I didn't understand.
So a good gesture a corporate parent has made for me was when I was at a residential, during the month of Ramadan, he would always make sure there was food ready for me after midnight and food ready for me for when I break my fast. That was obviously very important to me because I was the only Muslim in the residential, and he recognised that and put all the arrangements in place.
The champion board put me through some driving lessons and they had them for free. This is going to help me drive basically.
To find out more information about being a corporate parent, head over to the Scottish Government website, Who Cares Scotland, and to our Twitter page via Edinburgh Champs.
It almost seems too simple, but what the Edinburgh Champions have said is completely in line with the ambition for Scotland's children, that children grow up loved, safe and respected, so that they can realise their full potential. However, we know it takes a village to raise a child. Schools and educational settings in all their forms can have a massive impact on children, their lived experience and their outcomes. They can be the constant in a child's life, even if everything else around them is changing. So this slide reminds us that we have a duty to ensure care experienced children and young people grow up loved, safe and respected. So how do we know what needs to change to make things better for care experienced children and young people?
Okay, now we're going to look at the Independent Care Review, which started in 2016. It was a root and branch review as it was nationally recognised that the current care system wasn't fit for purpose. The review was overseen by Fiona Duncan. It was extensive, included testimonials from people with lived experiences, families, carers, practitioners, corporate parents, and many other organisations and stakeholders. Over half of the voices noted in the Promise report, following on from the review, were from people with lived experience. The review took place over a 4-year period up until 2020. It exposed the fact that the care system is hugely complex, confusing, and very difficult to navigate. For example, there are 44 pieces of legislation, 23 pieces of secondary legislation, and 3 international conventions that govern the thing we call the care system. To get it right for our care experienced young people, we know we need to have a more coordinated and systematic approach. This is where everyone, and more specifically the corporate parents, must work together and see a young person with care experience holistically in the context of their family and their community, and not just in the context of their learning or another individual aspect of their life, for example, their mental health. The Promise was written to try and join up the supports and services around the lives of care experienced young people, and highlight how care experienced people think things need to change for the care system to be better. So the Promise isn't just one document, it's actually 7 different reports, including the Promise, the Pinky Promise, which is an easy read version of the Promise, the rules, the money, follow the money, the plan, and a thank you. It is well worth your while looking further into the Promise, and all the documents can be found online, and within your script there is a link to those documents. Today we'll look further at the plan and the first part of the plan, known as the Change Programme 1. This programme covers the work to be carried out during the first 3 years of the plan up until 2024, and there will be 2 further programmes which will run from 2024 to 2030. So the plan Promise timeline. The Promise itself, as you'll see, has 5 foundations, which encompasses 84 promises or commitments made to care experienced children and young people. These commitments have been made by all Scottish political parties in their manifestos, something that has never happened before. Education in our work mostly fits into the scaffolding foundation, and we always have to remember that education is very much part of the scaffolding of care. These priorities cover all children's services, however, the sections outlined in red have particular relevance to us in education. You may wish to describe in detail at this part your own authorities, priorities, and how you're striving to meet them. In the plan, the principles and priorities have been identified and they are listed on the right-hand side, the core principles. The principles recognise the impact of poverty, the importance of using non-stigmatised language, the fact that we need to listen to our young people and their families to uphold their rights. We need to focus on these things, in other words, designing services that meet the needs of families rather than asking families and young people to use services and supports that really don't work for them.
So now let's take a closer look at just one of the core principles of the Promise. We're going to look at how does our language around care need to change. These young people from Inverclyde tell us what language they don't like and what they would prefer in the next video.
Language is important, language is powerful. For care experienced kids, language matters. I think the language used in a care setting is important because depending on what words you use is going to impact how that young person feels. So by using certain words, they might make young people feel more like a number or an object or a thing rather than a person. or they may feel like they've done something, they're in the wrong or done something wrong just because of the terminology used.
I think it's important because depending on what language that you say, you might upset the people around you.
Sometimes if you've came from a different house, or like if you've just came from your house from your mum and your dad, and with the language they use in a different setting, like in a unit or a new home, it might make you feel not wanted with the language they use. And I think it's important, just by the way some people talk with the words they use with everybody, and sometimes it can make you feel bad about yourself.
Some say placement, we prefer where we live.
Some say unit, we prefer house.
Some say parent, we prefer my guardian.
Some say care plan, we prefer future plan.
Some say respite, we prefer having a break.
Some say daily logs, we prefer my diary.
Some say contact, we prefer family time.
Some say siblings, we prefer brothers and sisters.
The words I'd like to change would be the words lack and tack, because the word lack, if people don't understand the meaning behind it, they may feel like they're lacking in something, or they're done something, when that's not necessarily the case. I felt a bit upset when the word lack and tack was used about me, because I felt like I did something wrong, because I didn't understand, as no one had explained to me what these words meant.
I would like the word unit to be changed, as I live there and it's my home, and whenever I get packages I need to state that it's a unit and not a home. It made me upset because it's where I live. I've been living there for 8 years. I don't classify it as a unit anymore, I classify it as my house.
I think the words I'd like to see change is in care, because sometimes when somebody says in care to me, it makes me feel as if I'm different from everybody else. So I think it should be changed to care experience instead of in care.
These were just some examples of words we would like to change. There are others too, like abscond, hearing, community time and safeguarding.
I think it's important for people to notice, for the children, with the words they use, that sometimes it can make them feel upset, like with some words they use, as it might not be what they're used to.
Language is important, language is powerful. Does language matter to you?
Nothing about us without us.
Sorry there, I couldn't get my microphone back on. So you'll see there from the video, some of the language we've heard in that film is so ingrained in how we talk about and write about care experienced children and young people, and it's going to take time to change. However, we do need to start to realise the ambition of being loved, safe and respected is the key word there. We have to remember that, you know, language really can have an impact on how a young person feels around respect. Now, we don't have time to go over the promise in any sort of detail, so let's look at just a few key messages from it. How might these statements translate into our practice as an educational establishment and also as individuals? Now, if you're delivering training at this point, we would suggest that you contextualise this slide and look at those key statements there, and look at how you might link them to professional learning that's undertaken either within your establishment as a collective, or indeed any individual CLPL that's going on. I think any opportunity that we can take to integrate what the promise says and integrate any learning we have around care experience into wider training experiences will be helpful. So for example, inclusion, relational approaches, attachment, trauma-informed practice, whatever the kind of key focus within your authority is, this slide gives you an opportunity to discuss them and link those DLP back to these statements from the promise. So ultimately, we're talking about scaffolding there. We want the scaffolding we provide to have an impact on educational outcomes for our care experienced children and young people. What do they currently look like? And here you'll see on this slide, it gives us the current picture. At this point, we'll ask you to kind of describe some of the stats. And again, you can bring in your own context at this point. These are national statistics, so it's important to draw on attendance. Attendance, as we know, is not just a concern around care experienced learners. However, we do understand the vulnerabilities that go alongside being care experienced. So it's very important to identify, obviously, that those attendance figures are lower. You'll see there the exclusion data, quite stark difference between our care experienced learners and our non-care experienced learners. You'll see again from the promise that they're very clear about the exclusion of care experienced learners ending. And we would fully anticipate that that's something that's on the agenda for all of you at authority levels to look at how we can reduce those exclusions. And I think that piece of data there really kind of encapsulates that. When we look at leaver attainment, this ties into how aspirational we need to be for our learners. Again, there's that big gap for anybody who's secondary on the call, 71% to 96%. And when you look at that breakdown there, that's looking at one or more qualification at level 4. So really that data shows a reflection that we need to have on what are we doing to ensure that we have that minimum one or more qualification at level 4 to try and reduce that gap when it comes to attainment. And again, leaver destinations, that data there will likely reflect the data within your own local authorities. Again, it's a significant gap, and although on the slide there, we're talking about there has been an increase in kind of closing that gap, and the outcomes have improved, there's still work to be done. So again, it's drawing attention to that. What are we doing? Again, probably more for secondary colleagues at that kind of level to try and make sure that the destinations that we support care experienced learners into are sustained. And then at the bottom there, you'll see, we know that there is that gap in learning for our primary learners and our learners in the BGE. And again, it's a chance for you to reflect on, what are you doing, I suppose, to close that gap? How are you tracking those young people? What does that look like? And we know our care experienced learners can often have gaps in learning due to attendance, due to, all the things that we've talked about previously in the slide. So it's about how we address them and how we identify that, there is progress to be made within a level. It might not always be hitting those markers, but it's really important that we take this time with the data that we've got in this slide to really reflect what we are doing about trying to close that gap as much as possible. We do have to remember, however, that is a snapshot in time. And these educational outcomes, they're not always predictive. Care experienced children and young people can and sometimes do as well as their peers if they receive the right support at the right time from the right people. However, for many, they still encounter barriers accessing and engaging in education that are likely to affect their long-term educational outcomes. However, this isn't just about children and young people knowing about their rights, it's also about how we realise their rights. The complexity of the life of a child or young person moving through the care system can make it much more challenging for us to ensure their rights are realised. For example, accessing full-time curriculum education may be more challenging for a young person whose learning is repeatedly interrupted because they miss a lot of schooling, or even have multiple school changes because they move from being looked after at home to living with a relative, to a foster placement, to a residential house in a short period of time. And that story there is not that uncommon, and that can have a real impact on them understanding and being able to realise their rights. So this is really a kind of point when you're delivering the training to really think about what you need to do and where do you start here. Now, ambition, you will be ambitious for all your learners, not just your care experienced learners. So again, take this opportunity when delivering this slide to explore with your staff what that looks like within your school, potentially connecting that ambition to your school values, your ethos, your aims, your vision, etc., and being really clear that as a school community, you know who your care experienced cohort are. That kind of leads on to that second point. again, a description and a discussion around, do we really understand that context of care experience? And I suppose from personal experience delivering the training, what I would say is that you're likely to have a conversation where, you know, you're able to do that really easily with pupils and staff. Maybe work to be done around how we support parents with that, but it's really important that our full school community really share in that understanding of what care experience means, so that they can really be encouraging and engage in all of the work towards care experience learners. So this point here, we can't support care experienced children and young people well if we only focus on what happens in education. We have to also consider how we can support and work with families and the wider services to improve outcomes for children and young people. So again, at this point, you may want to have a discussion about and a reflection on that partnership working that exists within your school community, within your authority level. You know, what access to support do you have for care experienced learners, and maybe have a discussion around any barriers that may be in place for that, and how you can prioritise your care experienced learners towards that kind of partnership working that we're moving towards. And again, this is a task definitely depending on how you're delivering. You could possibly do this task in person. If you're doing delivery in person, it might be post-it notes up on a wall. There might be a discussion, but what we would be hoping is that the outcome and the answers that you're getting from this collaboration reflection task would reflect the work and the discussions that you've had earlier on in the slides, so that you can really gather, I suppose, that your school community or as an individual, you would do a reflection task on your own. But really what we're looking for is that you've got the possibility to add a Jamboard, a Menti, etc. Or if it's face-to-face, you still have that kind of that reflection and that discussion. Again, for this one, we've outlined that you could possibly have the opportunity to outline what your next steps may be. You would have the option to delete this slide if you maybe feel that this is a discussion you'd want to have when you and your school establishment had completed all the training. But also, again, it's maybe just an opportunity to reflect on what you've heard. You will have had discussion opportunities. You will have had opportunities throughout the training to get some kind of feedback. So you might feel you're in a position that you want to kind of guide that conversation and start to think about next steps. But equally, you have the option to take this slide out if you don't wish to do so at this point. And then here we have if you want to know any more about any of the topics in this presentation, this is some of the links and the available resources to you.
Thank you, Susan, Greg and Nicola. That was fantastic, just running us through some of that key information about corporate parenting, the promise, educational outcomes, and what we can potentially do within education. So that's us come to the end of this first session of the Keeping the Promise Award. Now, because we were running a wee bit late at the beginning, I failed to say many of you are coming along today to hear this presentation with the intention of going away and delivering this presentation within your own educational setting. So this gives you an opportunity to hear us saying it first before you do it yourselves. Some of you will be here just because it's for your own professional learning, and that's absolutely fine as well. You'll realise that we were, all of us, deliberately reading from scripts, and that is quite intentional. So when you go to the resources that Nicola has actually put in the chat function, which is these presentations, there are scripts with it. And we do ask you to stick quite closely to the script. If you're doing the same presentation multiple times and you become familiar with it, there's a possibility for a little bit of ad-libbing. But the reason we ask people to use the scripts is to keep the language non-stigmatizing, and the scripts have been written in that way quite deliberately, that there's no stigmatizing language there. We don't slip into that old-fashioned language that we're quite familiar with. So that's what we ask you to do that. And there's two corrections I want to just make in case people have picked things up wrong. When Beth Ann was talking in her section about her experience and about the Keeping the Promise Award, she was referring back to the original Keeping the Promise Award developed by North Lanarkshire, in which case there was 4 professional learning sessions. In this new streamlined Keeping the Promise Award programme that we've developed with the West Partnership and Education Scotland, there are only 2 presentation sessions and then a short e-learning module and a little knowledge check. So that's just to confirm that. And there was one further correction I wanted to make. Originally, the intention of the Promise plan was that there would be 3 rolling 3-year plans that would, and the 1 year of preparation, which would make up the 10 years to 2030. I think the intention now of the Promise Scotland is that the second plan will be a 6-year plan. So rather than it be 3 years, because I think they found it difficult to keep up with the reporting cycle. So I think it's going to be a 6-year plan for the next one. So that's the only changes to the presentation.